Is everybody ready? SLC TV, we're good to go. Leo. All right. Welcome to today's Redevelopment Agency Board meeting. Due to the ongoing practice of social distancing, RDA meetings will continue to be entirely remote, like this, which means although we're not all together in person, we're all together here. There is a new requirement to identify emergency conditions under HB 5002 to address why our board meetings are being held remotely rather than at an anchor location. I am going to read a public statement. I, Amy Fowler, RDA Board of Directors Chair, hereby determined that conducting the RDA board meeting at an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at said anchor location. The World Health Organization, the President of the United States, the Governor of Utah, the Salt Lake County Health Department, Salt Lake County Mayor, and the Mayor of Salt Lake City have all recognized a global pandemic exists related to the new strain of coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. Due to this state of emergency caused by the global pandemic, I find that conducting a meeting at an anchor location under the current state of public health emergency constitutes a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at that location. Moreover, the city and county building, which is the anchor location for RDA board meetings, is presently closed for regular occupation due to damages sustained during the March 2020 earthquakes. That is my official statement of why we're doing this. So, although, as always, we are as it has been the last few months, conducting our meetings electronically, and it is different and less familiar than our in-person public process, we are still an open and public meeting. We welcome all members of the public who may be watching our usual live video feeds on the City Council's agenda page, YouTube, SLC TV, or Facebook Live. We are glad to have you here with us and hope that you are staying safe. And just because we are in person does not mean that democracy stops. We do have time for public comment, and we encourage everybody to give your public comment. Public comments can also be submitted written to the RDA offices at P.O. Box 145455, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114. Your comments about any RDA business, or if you have any feedback to give us regarding today's meeting, please contact us. So if this is your first time on one of our electronic virtual WebEx RDA meetings, I'll go through the process a little bit about public comment. Bobby will be handling our public comments today, and he will be our host. He will identify the callers in the order that they have arrived via WebEx. He will state the name of the first person to comment, followed by the next commenter, who can then prepare to speak. When the meeting host unmutes you and lets you know it's your turn, please state your name and indicate the topic you're speaking on, and then the 2-minute timer will begin. At the 2-minute mark, we will announce time and your microphone will be muted. Since we're connecting electronically, there may be some delay in people's comments and discussion items, more so than usual. So please be patient with us. Fortunately, we've had some experience over the last few months, but you never know when there's going to be a kink. RDA meetings have certain guidelines to make sure that people feel comfortable and safe to participate in this new way of conducting the public's business. To help facilitate our comment period, please be respectful to others. Please avoid yelling, making any racial slurs, obscene or defamatory remarks. We want this experience to be as positive as possible for everyone and be respectful of what people are saying and give them the opportunity to make those statements. I will turn to Bobby and see if there's anyone that wants to talk to us.
Good afternoon. I do not have anybody who is asked to speak.
Okie doke. Well, if anybody comes up, because how we're doing this electronically, I'm happy to take comments through at another time in the meeting if somebody does join us, not realizing that we try to do those public comments in the beginning. So Bobby, just chime in and let me know if somebody is waiting and we can accommodate that.
Will do, Board Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're moving through our agenda quite quickly. We don't have any other public hearings at this time, so we'll go to item C1. This, board members, is just an informational section for the Central Station pre-disposition property report. We brought this up in June, I believe it was, and it was sort of just a written information. I suggested that if anybody had questions or comments, they reach out to Danny. We wanted to put this back on to see if anybody had any questions about Central Station disposition. And Danny, I know that you and I talked, and I told you not to prepare anything, but why don't you give us just a 3-minute synopsis over the Central Station predisposition?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, board members. Madam Chair, as you indicated, this was submitted last month as a written briefing. Within your packet, you do have copies of the slides that we prepared at that time for the presentation. Tammy's available and is happy to go through those if we have any questions. But essentially, this property disposition report is something that is required as part of our disposition policy. It is a report that we provide to the board at various stages of the process as we dispose of properties, specifically as they relate to the Tier 1 classification. These properties, while they do not specifically meet that Tier 1 category, we felt that given their aggregate acreage, that a courtesy report was warranted, and we wanted to provide that to the board. And so this is simply talking through the process that the agency has been working directly with UTA as far as putting this property out as part of a joint RFP offering. And that is in coordination with the plan that was done for the Central Station area in terms of a design plan of potential development opportunities that was done by UDA back in April of 2017. So our goal with this reuse plan is to essentially improve the neighborhood intensity, provide some kind of sense of place through a cohesive development plan for both our property as well as the UTA properties, and also include some options for housing. So I will ask Tammy if she has anything she would like to add to that, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Hello. Hi, everyone. The only thing I would add is that we are working with UTA to get the RFP out in the third quarter of this year, hopefully to get a development team selected by the end of the year.
Excellent. Board members, do you have any questions? Darren.
Yeah, thanks. It's kind of been explained, and it was in the written briefing a little bit, that the RFP is written in such a way that developers can propose to work on, I think it's called zones, all 3 zones, or just one of the zones. I was just wondering how you foresee that happening, and if you already have developers that have expressed interest, and if you have an idea as to, do you think it's going to be like, what's the intention? Do you think it'll be one developer doing all 3 of them, or we'll get multiple people involved in it? I guess the question is, how big of a scale of a development are we going to see here? Is it a big thing or a lot of little things?
I shared a map. Can everyone see the map? Great. So there are 3 distinct zones that will go out with the RFP. And as Director Amano mentioned, a development team can submit a proposal for all 3 zones or pick one of the zones. And it will be through the selection process that the ultimate decision is made, whether to go with one master developer on all 3 zones or kind of do it a la carte. And in terms of the scale of development, the preferred development scenario for the build out will be based on the plan that Urban Design Associates established a little while ago in partnership with WFRC and UTA. So the scale of the development, whether it's a master developer or separate development teams for each zone, will be based on that plan.
Great, thanks, Tammy. Darren, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, Are there any other questions from board members? Okie dokie. Thank you for providing this and the other written information. Again, if board members have any follow-up, Danny loves when I do this, but reach out to Danny. I just offer up his services. If there are other questions or you want more information, we can always do small groups or, text, whatever. With that, we will move on to our next 2 items.
Hey, Madam Chair, we have a couple of people that are watching it, Thor Roundy and a call-in user too. And I
Okay,
was just wondering if you wanted me to unmute them for a moment and see if they had a comment, since neither of them responded in the chat.
sure.
Give me just one moment, Madam Chair.
Mhm.
Call-in user 2, if you are interested in speaking, you are unmuted now. Nope. Okay. Thor, you are unmuted. If you have a comment, please feel free to share it now.
Okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any comments, but I am obviously very interested in how things progress, so I'll just be paying attention to what you're doing, staying informed, and then participating once you get the RFP released.
And that is all we have, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Okay, we will go back to our agenda. We are looking at agenda item number 2 and number 3, sort of combined as an overall broad discussion. We have Allison from the council office, Danny, Tammy, and Tracy from RDA, and Jen, I believe, is around in case with Cam, if there's any questions. And these 2 topics are the RDA housing framework that has been being worked on for the last year at least or so, and also the Northwest Quad housing tax differential. And for board members and people listening, part of the reason that we wanted to do this together is because it's almost a chicken and an egg, which comes first and which do we talk about first. So I imagine that one discussion will lead into the other and we'll kind of be going back and forth-ish. But this will really be the first time. I think we have 60 minutes total for this whole discussion. I think it will be one of the first times that we kind of can delve in a little deeper into the Northwest Quad policy for the housing framework there and how that will interact with the housing framework that RDA has put together. So that's an overview of what I imagine what the intent of these 2 topics was to be. But with that, I will turn it over to whoever wants to start. Allison, do you want to start or do you want me to turn it over to Danny?
If you'd like, Madam Chair, while Danny's getting unmuted, I'll just say that RDA staff will be leading this discussion, and I'm here to take notes on the part of council staff.
Great, thank you. It's all yours.
And I will, okay, thank you. I will just introduce Tammy and Tracy and follow up on what you said, Madam Chair, that the housing framework has been an ongoing conversation with the board as we have developed that. And more recently, at the board's request, we were asked to take a look at either providing some information or an opportunity within this context in a board meeting to do kind of a gathering of data and information as it relates to Northwest Quadrant. So Tammy and Tracy have 2 presentations to go through that will cover those, and then we'll be available for any questions following that and look for direction from the board. So I think Tammy indicated she's going to start off for us.
Thank you, Danny. Let me quickly share my screen. All right, can everyone see that?
We can. And Tammy, just before you get started, as per usual, when we are sharing screens, it's hard for me to see all of the board members. So just feel free, if you have a question, to politely interrupt Tammy and ask the question. You don't have to ask me 'cause I can't see you.
Great, thanks, Madam Chair. As Danny mentioned, this is a follow-up to a very long conversation that we've been having on housing. It was back in December of 2017, actually, that the RDA board directed RDA staff to develop a draft housing allocation policy for the board's review. And that really kicked off an ongoing discussion on affordable housing policy. Between May 2018 and February 2020, RDA staff brought a series of briefings to the board. And these briefings included topics including statutory housing requirements, previous funding allocations, programs, and tools. And there was a lot of policy discussion that was included in these briefings. And then finally, in February of 2020, we brought a draft Salt Lake City Housing Implementation Framework that was jointly developed by CAN, Community and Neighborhoods, HAND, Housing and Neighborhood Development, and the RDA. And this framework really laid out the common understanding of how housing implementation would work across city divisions and departments. So based on that framework, we are coming back to the board today with two RDA specific frameworks that we hope can be moved forward to actually policy resolutions. The first framework is a draft housing allocation framework that would establish housing accounts, clarify the requirements of these, each of these sources of funds, outline eligible activities, define priorities, and kind of create a process for allocating housing funds through the annual budget. The second policy framework we have in your packet is a draft Housing Development Trust Fund Program framework. And this really stems from the recent allocations that the City Council and the board has provided the RDA for the sales tax funds. Those have been dropped into an account called the Housing Development Trust Fund. But when the council and board allocated these funds, the intent really was to create a one-stop shop program for housing development within Salt Lake City. So this framework would do that. It would combine all the different sources of housing that the city has for affordable housing development to establish a one-stop shop program. So to delve more into these frameworks, this is the kind of an outline of the RDA housing allocation framework. And there's a lot going on in this chart, but really that's a factor of the different sources of housing funds and the fact that we have to keep these funds in separate accounts as per statutory requirements. So, which we have been doing. The framework would just add on another account to what we already have, which is the Northwest Quadrant housing account. And these different sources of funds have different requirements as to how these funds are used with different eligible activities, different AMI targets, that sort of thing. So the policy would establish the 4 accounts, clarify the statute and regulatory requirements for each account, and then look at what programs and activities the RDA currently has and define by account which program and activities are eligible, and then establish high-level funding priorities per account. And we envision these high-level funding priorities, since this is a policy that will be ongoing over time, these would be pretty general. For example, with the Northwest Quadrant housing account, we have heard the board, our sense is that the board really wants to focus these funds in neighborhoods adjacent to the Northwest Quadrant that will be impacted by Northwest Quadrant development. So, for example, a funding priority of the Northwest Quadrant account could be to prioritize those funds for neighborhoods west of I-15. This policy would also establish kind of a strategy on an annual basis for coordinating and allocating housing funds. And it's on the annual basis that the board could get more specific with policy priorities for funding. For example, on an annual basis, we could look at all of the funds that are available, and if there's a strategic site acquisition that the board may want to go after, we could break down different funding objectives on an annual basis. So it flows from the accounts down to how the funds would be annually allocated. The second framework in your packet is for the Housing Development Trust Fund program. So what we have right now with the RDA are a few different programs for the development of affordable housing. This policy, if it moves forward, would replace those different programs and centralize all of the resources for affordable housing development into one program that would be permanent, revolving, and annually renewable. And this really is intended to do what the board has been asking, which is to centralize resources for affordable housing development. So on the back end of the program, there would be the 4 housing accounts funding this program. But in terms of what the public and what developers see when they come to the RDA to apply for funds, it would be one application process, one review process, and one set of approval and underwriting standards. And we're envisioning that the application process would be an annual or a biannual notice of funding availability, where all of the different housing funds could be consolidated into one NOFA, or we could issue special NOFAs just with one source of funds. For example, if we wanted to do something specific with the Northwest Quadrant housing funds, we could issue a unique NOFA specific to the policy objectives of those funds. We also envision that these NOFAs would be transparent and competitive. However, there could be opportunity or purpose to issue kind of open-ended NOFAs for policy objectives that are harder to achieve. For example, the high opportunity funds. Right now we have issued a NOFA, but there isn't a hard deadline on those. We're receiving applications on a rolling and open-ended basis. So this is an overview of the 2 policies that we hope to move forward to finally get these policies in place as the board initiated back in December of 2017. And today what we're asking is, in general, is the board in favor of us moving forward with these frameworks as proposed? And are there any high-level funding priorities that the board wishes should be worked into the housing framework? For example, like I said, our geographic focus areas with the Northwest Quadrant funds or other high-level policy objectives. And another kind of policy issue that we need to discuss more on the administrative end is there's 2 different review bodies currently reviewing housing applications depending on the source of funds, the RDA Finance Committee and the Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board. So we really want to consolidate this application review process into one board or a combination of the boards. So I don't know if the RDA board has input on that. We will be discussing it more on the administrative level.
Any board members?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Yeah,
Jane,
take it away.
I just really appreciate RDA staff putting this together. I know that it's been a lot of back and forth, a lot of conversations, making sure this Northwest Quadrant tax differential has been discussed. So I really appreciate staff doing that. My question is, by talking about annual reporting, what if we wanted to bring it up more than one time during the year? Is that something that we can do as a board instead of an annual checkup or discussion of it?
Yeah, we could do that right now. Currently, I believe we do our loan portfolio and our property reports twice a year. And so we certainly could have that same frequency or more, depending on how the board wanted to do it. And I think, as Tammy said, if the funding requests go out maybe twice a year, then that might make more sense as well to kind of have those conversations aligned with those funding offerings.
Just in case we wanted to pivot quickly or, look at something. My other question is, I'm more than willing to start having discussions on policy discussion with Northwest Quadrant funding. Just to give a little background on funding our futures money, that actual sales tax came about because of the prison that's in District 1. And I just want to remind everybody about that. But and I didn't make a big stink about it when I probably should have made a bigger stink about it. But just making sure that we focus these funds where they should be focused, and they be focused there in perpetuity. And this is a great statement, I think, from us, saying that these funds will be funded in the west side, west of I-15 in perpetuity until the access to opportunities are equal across the city.
Yeah, Director Rogers, if I can follow up on that, that specifically, question number one in Tammy's list is are there high level priority direction items that the board would like to put on these fundings? And then obviously, as you said, you have the opportunity at any time to pivot on that based on what you want to target in any given year, but you could certainly put that as a high level priority and objective for the funds.
I'm interested in affordable home ownership for these funds, you know, in the Northwest, from the Northwest Quadrant in the area, to give opportunities to lower income families to start building wealth as they own properties and they work. You know, you might have people, workforce that might need a place to be, to live at. So.
Chair, just to follow up with Anna, I'd love it if our staff and RDA staff, I think they have an idea of where I've really tried to push in homeownership affordability as well as market rate. But if the rest of the board members are okay, I would love for them to come back with some policy ideas and how that we can not just use this money as a one shot, but use it as an opportunity for us to make something out of it. Like, we've never done this before. We've never had the opportunity to discuss, hey, we can actually do affordable home ownership, market rate home ownership, so that we build, neighborhoods, right? But also do apartments in that mix where you have affordable and market rate of rentership. But in turn, that money's used and you create economic development. I mean, there's a lot that we can do. Our staff has heard me talk about it as well as Danny and his staff. So I would love it if they come back and give us some ideas and policy direction on how we can use it and best use it so that we have a return on it and can see that return.
Dan?
Well, thanks for the presentation. Now, this might be a real basic question, but how do we, when we look at the projects, how do we balance the housing with business development, systems and areas that just don't become an island of just housing and they're separate from everybody else, but the business side of the house, the daycare side of the house, the green space, how do we incorporate that and grade the projects on that merit instead of just, hey, we got 1,000 apartments, but they have no place to shop, eat, or grow. They don't become an opportunity zone. They become an island separate from anybody else, and then they die because they're just a project.
I can take a shot at answering that. I would say that with tax increment funds that are used for housing within RDA project areas, we definitely take a more involved approach in making sure there's a right mix of housing and economic development and open space and other activities, other good urban design, high level of architecture within the RDA project areas. However, citywide funds used outside of RDA project areas, we have a little bit less control because our funds outside of project areas can really only be used on the affordable component of a project, being 80% AMI or below. So we have really, outside of project areas, focused on the affordable housing piece. That being said, I think there's room to still implement some policy priorities on what projects you'd like funding directed to outside of RDA project areas as well.
Yeah, because these could be beautiful housing areas, but if there's no place to shop, eat, or drink, or have to take care of your kids, then they really are islands far away from anywhere. Even if they're just a mile away, that's an extra burden to get there and get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I appreciate this discussion. I am interested in what Director Rogers is talking about with trying to focus the funds on the west side, because that brings up an equity piece, which I think we're all really focused on right now, making sure that we're sort of building up all areas within the city. I think it's one thing I'm struggling to understand, and maybe I just need to learn a little bit more myself, is it in terms of like helping communities grow, is it best to focus affordable housing in certain areas? Or to me, it feels like it's better to spread them out, because right now there is so much affordable housing already. I mean, the most affordable housing in the city is primarily on the west side, and so getting more of that affordability piece to east side communities that already have some of those some of those services and supportive networks that would help families and communities of color and other people that have traditionally been sort of under supported, help support them and grow better. I think that's a balance I'm interested in figuring out. So I don't know if focusing affordable housing dollars only on the west side makes complete sense, but it's a discussion. I guess I'm not sure what to think yet.
Sure, I'd love to kind of answer that. It's not, if you look at how much money is coming in the first year, it's nothing to shout about, okay? And it's going to be a long time until something comes up. But there's opportunities for us to discuss bonding, off of that first increment that comes in. There's a lot of opportunities in looking at, funding different ideas. But my idea, and this is just my idea, and staff can come back and talk about it, but it's not about the affordable housing money would be used to build affordable housing, right? It would be affordable for sale units. It would be a for sale, affordable rental as well. But in the other part, we could invest in market rates. You have people who have home ownership that are affordable as well as market rates. So you're creating that balance, that network in these areas. But in opportunities, when you sell those units, you then reinvest that to create economic development for stores or for business opportunities in that same development. So it's not just a one shot where we're saying, here, developers, we want 15% of your units at market rate. I mean, affordable for 50 years. It's actually us investing in the communities and creating neighborhoods that have businesses and opportunities to grow.
And I think with that, James, it may be helpful because I think, and James, I don't want to speak for you, but there's kind of what you brought up earlier is that the sales tax came from the reason we were able to increase the sales tax was because of the prison. And so making sure that some of that money that we develop in a wise way goes out to the neighborhoods that are affected by the prison, which is why we got the sales tax increase in the first place, right? And that, I think that's one, as we look at Tammy's silos here, that's one of those bank accounts, right? And then we have the Northwest Quad, which that is a 10% that, yes, Tammy?
Oh, well, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I did want to point out that there are some policies that the board has implemented to encourage a mix of incomes and a diversity of housing on the west side. For example, the overnighter motel redevelopment, as part of allocating the site acquisition funds for that project, the board mandated that only 50% of the units could be deed restricted affordable housing to encourage that site to be mixed income. In our current NOFA policy, which the Housing Development Trust Fund policy would replace, one of the funding requirements is that it has to go towards mixed income housing. So there are funding priorities that you can implement to help encourage that diversity of housing types and diversity of incomes on the west side.
And then, so thank you, Tammy. So I think I think it would be helpful now if we move to the Northwest Quad presentation, because those are kind of two different things that we're talking about. And I think the board needs to discuss a little bit more after the presentation about what kind of policies we want to see that is direct to that 10% coming out of the Northwest Quad. So maybe we can do that, whoever's in charge of presentations.
That's Tracy's cue.
Yeah, I'm setting up. So that's actually been a great discussion. I think I'm going to be hitting on a lot of the things that have been discussed already. Can everybody see my screen? Is this you see the presentation?
It's gray.
It's great.
It's just blue.
Let's see.
Try sharing your screen rather than the app.
Okay. Okay. How's that?
We got it.
Is that visible?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. So in April, the board discussed policy considerations related to the tax differential within the Northwest Quadrant that will be set aside for affordable housing. So as a follow-up, RDA staff has prepared information on the following: demographic and housing information on neighborhoods adjacent to the Northwest Quadrant, primarily neighborhoods west of I-15. Eligible uses of tax differential to address potential impacts from the development within the Northwest Quadrant pursuant to State Code 17C, and a proposed structure for how the Northwest Quadrant housing funds may be structured in the context of the draft RDA housing allocation policy, which Tammy had just discussed. So we compiled demographic housing info focused on the neighborhoods adjacent to the Northwest Quadrant, which are primarily Salt Lake City's West Side neighborhoods. So we looked through the many city adopted master plans associated with the West Side, data from the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute and LIHTC awards throughout the years. And to summarize, West Side neighborhoods in general, compared to the rest of the city, is growing at a slower rate. There's a higher rate of home ownership and owner-occupied homes than other parts of the city. There's a lower share of LIHTC projects, larger family size and minority population, a lower rate of access to opportunity. And in terms of the master plans and kind of other characteristics of these neighborhoods, master plans have mentioned that redevelopment should be focused near neighborhood nodes. There's a focus on transit-oriented developments and to build on existing assets of the Jordan River and the 9 Line. And in addition to that, the majority of housing is comprised of single-family homes within this area. In terms of the eligible uses of tax differential pursuant to State Code 17C 1412, funds must be used to provide housing affordable to households earning 80% AMI and below. And within these parameters, these funds could be used towards affordable housing to acquire properties for construction, rehabilitation. This could also be used to land grant or contribute money to housing. It could be used to plan or promote housing, replace housing units as a result, replace housing units lost as a result of project area development. It could be also used to make payments on or establish a reserve fund for bonds for housing. And it may include infrastructure improvements if development impediment exists. So back to kind of the Northwest housing considerations. Within the context of eligible uses, the board may wish to consider general funding priorities, as Tammy had mentioned in her presentation. And here are just some considerations for general priorities for the Northwest Quadrant housing tax differential. I think we've heard a lot about just prioritizing neighborhoods that are adjacent to the Northwest Quadrant. I won't go through all of these, but these are just kind of some considerations that the board can consider. So back to this, again, this Northwest Quadrant account just falls in falls under the overall RDA housing allocation framework. And with that, we can kind of continue the discussion and we can answer any questions you may have about these slides. And Tammy, did you want to add anything to this discussion?
The only item I may add is the board also may wish to consider that these funds could be used to remove, for lack of a better term, undesirable land uses, for example, how the board allocated funds to acquire the overnighter motel. So I think that's an example of how these are affordable housing funds. You can very much still use them to improve neighborhood conditions and add opportunity to the neighborhood.
Great. Board members, discussion on this.
So wait, Tammy, can you elaborate on that? The funds, the Northwest Quadrant housing funds can be used to acquire properties like the overnighter, but those properties then must be used to create affordable housing. But in this case, we can say only 50% of the units are affordable housing.
Yes, as a state statute is a little bit gray on this, but by practice, the RDA has tried to keep, if it's not within a project area, has tried to keep the proportion of affordable housing funds in alignment with the affordable housing component for the project. So for example, if the project was only 10% affordable housing, we wouldn't want to fund 50% of the project.
And by the project, you mean the acquisition of the property?
Well, the overall project. So for example, the overnighter motel was, I think, $4 million to purchase. And the project going there is, I can't remember off the 50 million, Danny, do you know?
Yeah, I think it's 40 to 50 million, the initial proposal.
So you could acquire the entire site with the 4 million in housing funds and still have a lower portion of the project affordable and still comply with state statute.
Thanks.
More discussion here? Anyone?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I think that the nature of affordable housing also contributes to the percentage, Darren. Most affordable housing we've looked at has to be done through financing through the LIHTC process. And they have their own set of criteria that designate how much you do based on the project. So we have one layer on our side about how much to contribute to a project. But then LIHTC and other partners also have requirements about what they would finance and what they wouldn't. So it's a little bit combination there. I support Board Member Rogers' concept. I think there's some details to be worked out about how we do a mixture of for rent and for sale pieces in projects. And then how we designate that for sale projects will come back into a reserve fund to be reused to cycle through that. I think we also need to be clear about prioritization. You can say the legal requirement is it doesn't have to be, say, west of I-15. We need to be more clear about the geographic boundary piece, or the prioritization sounds like we would prioritize that, but in some cases it wouldn't necessarily have to be used in that area. Or an instance here where the first 10 years there may not be much money coming back into that fund. Could it be used to backfill, say, central business district funds or other funds in the RDA later on that are used now up front?
Danny?
Sorry, I was typing, so I make sure I can follow up on these. To answer the question, yes, you can do a few different things. Number one, you can always borrow from other project areas so long as you do repay it or have the intention to repay it. So you can certainly leverage additional funds in the early years. As Director Rogers said, depending on the source and the stream of funds, you could potentially even go out and either do a bond or just do traditional bank financing if you feel confident that you have a steady enough revenue stream. And then to the extent of revolving the funds, understanding that there's a priority for home ownership, that's not necessarily the only way you could create a revenue stream that could continue to circulate funds. You could buy property, maintain ownership of it, and turn around and just lease it to developers. And then those annual lease payments become your ongoing revenue stream that you could continue to circulate into the program. So a lot of flexibility, a lot of options. And I think really it's just a matter of what is the balance between our priorities, the projects we want to initiate up front, and what the appropriate level of risk is to kind of see where you want to leverage those funds and take opportunities in the early years.
Thank you, Danny. And I would encourage us to take a long view of this as well. I'm not sure if we say we want to prioritize them for 10 years, I'm not sure that's enough time. I think if we're talking about systematic investment in communities of color or low-income neighborhoods, it's going to take a long time, partially because there's not a lot of turnover here. As they mentioned earlier, the demographics are, these are a higher percentage of home ownership, which means they don't turn over every year. And so we have to invest in the long-term idea. So 20 years may not even be enough time. That's why I think we need to find, we can't bind future boards or councils to what we're saying today necessarily, but I think we need to find a way to be very clear. This is going to take a generation to really take hold of investment.
I mean, can we create a policy? Let's just say that we want the 10% differential of the Northwest Quad to stay on west of I-15. Can we create that policy? I mean, that would bind future boards, but it's a policy, right?
Right, which, I'm sorry, just to point out, you could create that policy and then future boards could change it, right? Through their sort of public decision-making process. The only way you can really legally bind future councils or boards is bonding, unfortunately, because that's like a contract with payments associated with it. At least that's the only one we've been able to think of. I'm sure there are other creative ways out there, but I mean, obviously, once you create that policy, then that becomes the political pressure that does bind future boards. But I don't know, Katie might have other thoughts, or Allison might have other thoughts about other ways to legally do that. So.
Well, Madam Chair, and I was just going to say we could tie it to access of opportunities. Once that stabilizes, that discussion could be made.
So you're saying create a policy that says this money needs to be spent in that area until there is equitable access to opportunities. And then the policy, you could change it or spend it elsewhere.
So, Madam Chair, I completely agree with James's goal for creating equitable access to opportunities on the east and west side. I just am not sure that I see it to where spending affordable housing dollars on the west side creates that equitable access. To me, it's other dollars that would create economic development and create business nodes on the west side that would start to become that equitable access. And if we look at affordable housing, I mean, even if we look at how schools PTSA is funded, right? The more we can get more we can get market rate housing in that area, the more we start to create those opportunities for communities on the west side. So I'm absolutely 100% on board with the idea of creating equal opportunities. I'm trying to figure out how affordable housing does that.
Well, I think
I'm trying to work out. And
Tammy or Danny or Tracy or anyone smart, Jen, anyone smarter than me can explain this if I'm wrong, but that 10% of the housing of that tax increment is just the start of what we could help offer to offset costs for developers. So then you are sort of requiring these, potentially you could require these other benefits for the community in order for them to, one, get that particular tax differential, but two, dollars from other places that we might have, right? So you can create that. The idea of this 10% is, should we create a policy where it stays in that area so that we have that incentive there in order to incentivize developers to create not just affordable housing, but the mixed use and the opportunities and the business nodes. Is that sort of a layman's term of explaining that?
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is that this is unique money because it's actually defined by state law what it has to do. because it's defined, that 10% is defined for housing. Unlike other RDA dollars where the project area plan kind of determines what. So in my mind, I think the 9-line project area and the North Temple project area and the State Street project area are all very appropriate places to fund a lot of that economic development that you're talking about, meaning you can use the tax differential from those areas, or maybe even program income fund. So sort of other RDA funding sources to maybe leverage with that housing funding. It was one of those unique situations where the state was willing to let the city have money for housing, and so, you know, we said yes.
Considering they took everything else away, we decided to.
It was a point, I guess, but and I think there's ways to structure it. To Amy's point, I think that the RDA has put together deals in the past where, like, the developer might have otherwise put market rate retail on the ground level, and the RDA staff has been able to negotiate, no, we really need like a daycare in this area, or I don't know, what was the example on North Temple just recently? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, and in the overnighter project, they're proposing to do a daycare as part of their first floor retail use. And so that's, Jen, I think you just hit it on the head. That's, I think the easiest way to kind of think about it is exactly as a combination of what Tammy and Amy just said is, in any project, the RDA's role may be only 10 or 20% of the overall funding of the project costs. But as part of us providing that funding, we can also require other conditions within the project, or we can go out and whether it's our own additional funds or the funds of other partners, we could then try to pull in other sources of funds that could provide those opportunities and metrics that aren't just strictly tied to housing, and whether that's, you know, the daycare or other uses. Those are things we can do as a package, and you can obviously transition that and shift that based on whether you're doing something on the east side or west side of what that mix is between the affordability and the other uses.
And I saw your hand, Andrew. I'll get with you in just one second. Tied to that, Danny, I think, you know, last year and for the year prior to that, the RDA staff worked really hard on our missions and values and sort of what the public benefits are and what kind of incentive you get depending on what sort of public benefit you're providing, right? And I think we also have to remember that that plays into where and how these monies get appropriated or get spent, right? Is that we've worked really hard on making sure that there is a mission and value statement to the RDA with a process by which we're evaluating the public benefit. And that includes all the things that both Darren and Dan were talking about, the green space, the business developments, the transportation, access to transportation. And so there's kind of like 3 different frameworks working at the same time before any money is distributed.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the easiest ways we try to just think of it is you obviously want more opportunities on the west side. You have a lot of the housing there now. You have more home ownership than I think people realize, and you have more market affordability there. So you want to infuse that with the opportunity side, and you want more affordable units on the east side. And so across the city, you're balancing where you want affordable housing and versus where you have a need for the opportunities and for success. And with this framework, you are now identifying the different buckets that you can use to go out and do that based on where your need is. And then building in a plan that you're looking at that data constantly and trying to adjust as you allocate funding on what the priorities and what the needs are. And so I think what everyone is saying is spot on. And we're really just trying to build that framework to where we can address those problems on a more flexible way, but with those high priority goals of what you're looking to do across the city.
Andrew, did you say something?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. My fundamental concern goes back to the chart about where LIHTC projects are currently being located. They're not on the west side.
Mm-hmm.
There's not capital coming to the west side. People are not investing over here, whether it's low income or market rate, period. We've got to find a way to get capital over here. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what our plans are. I think I'm deeply invested in the council side of looking at the low income housing overlay for the city. I'm not sure that's enough. I think inclusionary zoning's got to be a discussion. I think there are policy discussions that need to be had to make sure that it's equitable across the city. Right now, though, no one is putting their money west, and that's a huge problem for us. So folks who are living in the west side, who own homes, who are low income, aren't getting any benefits, period. Whether it's a low income apartment building, mixed use with retail on the first floor, or any sort of investment, and that's a huge problem we're going to have. I don't think this money itself in the next 10 to 15 years is going to be substantial. It's going to be incremental in how it grows. And so it could be 20 to 30 years before you see a large amount of money coming out of the Northwest Quadrant. But we got to have this plus other funding come in here. It's going to have to be a lot more than we think it is to really make a dent in the equity issue. So I fully support the concept, and there's some details to work out. But I think we do have to have that stick to our guns about mixed income across the city, period. That has to happen everywhere.
Okay. So, yeah, Dan.
I'm looking at these projects and I'm trying to get my hands around the idea of the size and scope of these projects. When you look at the prior presentation had those big apartments all along the railroad tracks, and I thought, holy cow, I was thinking old school projects and like a lot of people in a small area. And I'm kind of looking at this thing and saying, if we're going to want to build seeds or plant seeds, you need a small project like almost like an organic, a 9th and 9th and the 15th and 15th didn't grow out from anything but one store, two stores, one house, two houses. And these projects, if we try to make them too big, then they just overcome everything. If you had them smaller, then a small business feels like they can own that. And people, you live within probably a 5-block area. So if you go too big, then it just becomes overwhelming and it takes forever to grow. But if you had a smaller project and you could say, hey, that smaller project grows a little bit wider and it takes a couple blocks, another small project grows. So I'm concerned with trying to look at building a big city quickly instead of small little seeds and letting those plants grow and giving them a lot of water there for that one small 5-block area. And I throw that out, just my thoughts on the development and the growth is, back to Andrew's point, hey, no one's going to develop out there. No businesses are going out there. But if you had a small project in small areas, they might start to see a need or an ability to grow.
Okay. So board members, we are almost out of time for this particular agenda item. I did want to turn to the sort of policy questions that Tammy originally had in her first, in Tammy's presentation. It sounds to me, the first question was kind of looking at providing direction on our funding priorities. And it looks to me that there's a lot of discussion that I think needs to continue happening. But I can hear the sort of the things that jumped out kind of from everyone that spoke is the need for multi-income throughout the city and the need for like mixed use stuff over on the west side. And I don't know what that looks like as far as priorities or policies, but that's what I heard. And I think we'll bring this back for another discussion, but I think maybe focusing some of that on those priorities is what I'm hearing. And then the second one I feel is a little bit more, a little easier to address. And that is the question regarding whether we want, and I know you need to work administratively, but the review body should be charged with reviewing the Housing Development Trust Fund program applications. Because as Tammy mentioned, right now there's 2 different boards, if you will, that are reviewing applications. And for me, it seems if the whole idea of putting this money into RDA was to create a streamlined process, then let's continue to create that streamlined process and have one reviewing entity, whatever you and the administration look that might be the best reviewing entity. But for me personally, and I'd like just a quick, it's kind of a straw poll, thumbs up, thumbs down on what other people think about streamlining that into just one reviewing board for those applications. Are there thoughts on that from anyone? I see some thumbs up.
I'm a
Yeah,
thumbs
sure.
up. I not knowing who's on which board, I don't know which board is better, but maybe we try and combine them for a while and then get them down to a manageable size through attrition. I don't know exactly how that works out, but I would hate to just say, oh, board that's working with hand, you're thank you, but go away. Like I would like to make sure we keep engaged the people that are currently engaged. So I don't know if that's combining the boards together or how that works. Maybe that's too big of a board to be effective at that point.
And if I could jump in, Madam Chair, our intent in putting that on as a policy item was really just to make the board aware that right now, just between the different funding sources, you have two different boards. And so that does need to be something that if we are to try to accomplish the goal of the board, which is to streamline the process, and that certainly we need to come back and figure out as part of the policy. So I don't think we have that answer for you today. I will confess that we jumped ahead on that item before really even fully engaging hand, just because we put it down as a potential policy question we haven't even had that conversation yet. And so I think to Madam Chair, your point, that's just simply something we want to make sure we work out on the administrative side, because there's a balance there between the transparency, the roles, the city's procurement process, and whatever we propose will either be part of just an agency policy or may even need to require changes on the city's ordinance side. So we just wanted to make you aware that as part of trying to accomplish the board's goal of streamlining this, that is something that we've identified that we do have to figure out internally and administratively so that we can come back and propose something to you as a board and potentially even a city council. So
Awesome. Thank you. Is there any final thoughts on these two agenda items? I don't see any hands. I do, as always, just want to say thank you to the RDA staff for providing this information. It's always incredibly in depth, but still in layman's terms, so I can understand it. And beautiful charts as always. And I really appreciate the hard work that you guys are doing on this. And if I can say that my 2.5, 3 years of being on this board, it's been awesome to see how everyone is really passionate about creating wise policies that include equity throughout for our city. So and you can see that we're really thinking about that. Your staff is really thinking about it and providing us the information so we can be thinking about that. So thank you for all of the work that you've done there. With that, we're on to the next agenda item, which is number 4, a straw poll for the release of project area seed funds.
And Madam Chair, I don't know if you wanted to pivot to the tentative closed session
Yes.
first.
I do, indeed.
Okay.
We have a tentative closed session for the strategy to discuss purchase, exchange, or lease of real property. So I'd be looking for a motion, please.
Motion under those terms that you said, Madam Chair.
Second.
Katie, does that work? Okay. I have a motion by Board Member Rogers, a second by Board Member Wharton. I will roll call this. Anna.
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
Chris.
Yes.
Darren.
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. We are now going, everyone.
Hey.
Oh, James.
Hey.
James, I forgot you.
Hey. I'm a yes too.
Okay. So everyone just stay here. Bobby has figured out a new way to kick out the people that aren't allowed and to keep the people in that are allowed. So sit tight until Bobby tells us that we're good to go or something. We are back in our live session and we're on agenda item number 4. I will be looking for a straw poll to release project area seed funds. This is project area to the 9 line. I can make that straw poll myself.
Madam Chair, I would propose that we release the seed funds, the 9 line seed funds.
Great. All those in favor, put your thumbs in the air and I will count it off. Chris, Andrew, Darren, Anna, Dan, skip you to James. All have their thumbs in the air. And I said skip you because I pointed to Danny and Aaron, but they didn't vote. Okay, so there you go. Straw poll is unanimously a yes. Moving on, report or announcements from the executive director. Madam Mayor, are you still on here? Did you have anything for us today?
I'm on and I don't.
Okie doke. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, by the way. Report and announcements from the RDA staff. Danny, you want to take this away?
Yes, I had to make sure I was off mute. So thank you, Madam Chair. Just 2 quick reports for the board. First and foremost, just want to inform the board that we have already put out on the street the affordable housing funds from our fiscal year 21 budget through a notice of funding availability, just slightly under $4 million targeted towards affordable housing development assistance. Staff has held a virtual meeting to provide an overview of the application and requirements to about 15 developers. And we are accepting applications that are due on August 6th. You'll recall as a board, we put this money out as quickly as possible with that deadline in hopes that developers could hopefully put those as part of LIHTC project applications, that they would have a commitment of funds that they could include in that. So those funds are on the street and we're already receiving interest from developers on it. Second announcement is that the agency has also put out a call for artists for our Art for Hope Salt Lake City Public Art Project. This is an invitation to Utah artists to submit artwork that will be considered and chosen on 4-foot by 4-foot message squares. These squares will then be displayed and installed in groups throughout the city on RDA-owned property on a temporary basis, and we will also post them within an online gallery. So the RFP is open until Friday, July 31st as of right now, and the idea for the Art for Hope is just to have the local artist community submit pieces of art for equity, resiliency, all of the issues going of a message posted throughout the city. So that is live as well right now. Unless there's any questions, those are my 2 updates.
Anybody? Excellent. On to number 7, report of the chair and vice chair. I don't think I have anything. Anita, do you have anything?
No, I don't have anything other than to thank the RDA staff, for the work on the framework. That was really interesting, the housing framework. So thank you for all the. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Me too. Thanks, everyone. With that, no written briefings, no consent. We, I believe, are done with our RDA meeting and can adjourn. Mr. Chair, what time are we scheduled to be in our council meeting?
We are scheduled to be there 5 minutes ago, but I'll give everybody a 5-minute break. Yeah, if we can please come back at 3:40.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Wait, I believe it's a separate. Yeah, I think it's a separate WebEx link this time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
See